Pro Football Playbook, presented by the Pigskin Podcast Network. Your source for team news, draft needs, player profiles and rankings, full Senior Bowl, Combine, and NFL draft coverage. News, analysis, discussion. It's in the playbook. Now, here is your host, sports journalist Bill Alvstad, and featured analyst Keith Myers. Hey, Pro Football Playbook podcast listeners. I'm your host, Bill Alvstad, sitting down with co-host Mr. Keith Myers, and we are continuing our roster evaluations across the league. Today, we are doing the Los Angeles Rams and the Miami Dolphins. Welcome in, Keith.
Yeah, it's a interesting show here. I keep saying that almost every time, but I'm really interested into seeing how much you like the Miami roster, because you've been kind of on Miami for like 3 years now as God, they should be good. They've built this roster. They just need a quarterback and all of that.
There's two or three teams around the league that I really kind of intrigued by the roster building process, because I really kind of like the general managers. You know, San Francisco, the Cardinals, the Cleveland Browns, and I think the Miami Dolphins all have been at certain times in the last decade poorly managed teams, poorly run. And then by virtue of just the fact that they've remained at the top of the draft for a while, have accumulated picks and not done horrible things in free agency and so forth, and started to build rosters that now are interesting to me. And definitely that qualifies. But here's let's start with the Rams, defending Super Bowl champions. You would think that they have the best or close to the best roster in the league. And in closer examination to this roster, it's not quite that to me. And in fact, I think they diminished a little bit in the offseason just by virtue of the fact that their salary cap is now starting to restrict their spending behavior a little bit. And I thought that more talent left the roster than came on overall, but I still think that they're competitive enough, A, to win the division in the NFC West, and B, based on the fact that the entire NFC has kind of diminished and it shifted power to the AFC, I think they're still going to be in the hunt when it's all said and done in January.
I agree. I think that they are it's a class roster. It's very top heavy. It's got some of
That's
the
a good way to put it.
It's some of the best individual talent in the entire NFL is on this roster. But the talent level drops off quickly. And so you end up with, a team that has holes and really, really lacks depth, but the top end talent is still the most elite you're going to find in the NFL. Like Aaron Donald is an example. Probably the best defensive lineman in the game since the early 90s, what I would say Cortez Kennedy. And that's overlapping a lot of guys that are Hall of Famers like Warren Sapp, right?
And you go back there, at the tail end of Lawrence Taylor. I mean, Lawrence Taylor is probably the best defensive player that ever lived. And Aaron Donald is not quite in that conversation, but I'm telling you, by the time he's all said and done, he may very well be. And he's certainly that sort of player in his time, in this time frame, in his generation. This is the type of player that we're talking about, a guy that affects games, a guy that every single team needs to game plan for. Every center on Saturday night and the next morning has to face Aaron Donald is saying extra prayers, is eating extra things for dinner. It's kind of a last meal sort of situation where they're just like, I have no idea how I'm going to get through tomorrow, but here we go. And then especially the players that have to go up against him in their own division, they have to do it twice a year. It's a tough deal. Getting back to the roster overall as being top heavy. This is kind of the master class, if you will, of the way that you have to build a roster like this when you're in the Super Bowl window. And they're clearly in that window. They did it last year. They went out and did whatever they needed to do to get Matthew Stafford or Goff off the roster, made some key moves to surround him with some talent. Last year, I thought it was really fortuitous that they brought in both Von Miller and Odell Beckham Jr. to help them kind of get over that hump a little bit and ensure the fact that they would be there at the end. It was still the way that they got into the playoffs and the lack of talent there in the playoffs in the end, I think helped them a little bit. And then they faced a team that just wasn't quite ready for prime time, kind of made an easier path for them. I'm not going to hand it to them, though, that way. They went out and earned it. But what did you think that they did in the offseason, either to improve or solidify, or have they just diminished in a number of different position groups?
Well, I think they've diminished in a number of different position groups, but not terribly. They went and they lost Odell Beckham Jr. and Robert Woods at wide receiver, but they replaced him with Allen Robinson, who is a really nice player himself. So that's the type of thing, where
and Bobby Wagner on defense.
Well, yeah, I was looking at just that one position though. You have they never had both Beckham and Woods at the same time, and so having Robinson to replace those two, it kind of makes up for it. But then, you lose Von Miller and you bring in Bobby Wagner. Now they're very different players. One's a pass rusher and one's an off the line, linebacker. But Bobby Wagner's as good as they've ever been. Or at least he was early in his career.
Yeah.
And then and Von Miller was also the downside of his career too. But they've done enough to try and patch some holes.
They've done enough on the top end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then they've lost a lot of backups and replaced them with guys that weren't, they were third stringers last year. And so their depth definitely took a major hit.
Yeah. And then they didn't pick in the draft until 104 overall. They got Logan Bruce, who could end up coming in and competing at their right guard position. But after that, it's mostly a depth. Jacoby Durant could possibly come in and be their slot corner, their nickel guy. And they've got a depth piece in Kyron Williams there from Notre Dame. I think he's going to have some playing time ultimately behind Cam Akers and Darrell Henderson. But overall, I think that, and again, I'm going to point to the idea of just the NFC being diminished. When you really take a look at it, you've only got just a few teams that they need to compete with to get back into the NFC Championship game. Green Bay, Tampa, and and they just have to emerge out of the division, which is not that tough anymore now that Russell Wilson has left and some of the other teams have slid back just a little bit. So,
one thing we haven't mentioned is the loss of their left tackle, and I think that's going to be more significant than some of these other moves.
Yeah, Andrew Whitworth retired finally after. Oh my goodness, a huge long career, and he 42 or 3, something like that when he retired.
Yeah, but he was still playing at a really high level.
Now, they did have his replacement on the roster, and Joseph Noteboom, who they did extend, and so they do feel comfortable with their ability to kind of move forward. But yeah, that's not quite the same level of play as Whitworth. Yeah. So
yeah, I mean, Whitworth is he was still, even at his age, probably easily top 5 in the NFL at left tackle, and Noteboom's going to be okay. I don't think he's going to be at that same level. So
based on their salary cap and based on where they're at, and they just re-upped Matthew Stafford as well to an extension. So they've got the pieces in place. They know it's a win now mode. They are in win now mode. How long is that window open now?
They've got a couple more years. They are starting to age, and they're going to have to find ways to restock a roster when you don't have draft capital and your salary cap situation is a mess, and that becomes really hard.
It's not quite the level of the Saints, but it's approaching that because they push stuff out. You know, they create void years and so forth, and all that ends up having to come to a head at some point. And you know, I would imagine it is probably year 3 of from right now. Matthew Stafford's deal will be, you know, winding up a little bit. Some of their players you mentioned getting older, and then you know, just the salary cap. But the salary cap's going up as well, so they're probably counting on a little bit of that.
Yeah, they'll get some
and
relief.
They will force the window to remain open if they still are in a competitive situation. And as far as I can tell, especially with their coach Sean McVay, I don't see a window closing on them until Matthew Stafford's done.
No, I don't know about that because their win now mentality, which got them a Super Bowl. So I am not saying that they did anything. I mean, it worked. But they're going to have a roster that is kind of devoid of young talent, and you need those players. You need those draft picks, those guys on rookie deals that, you know, bring speed and athleticism as the rest of your roster ages, and they're not going to have it. And you're going to start to see guys get hurt more as they age. I mean, that's just part of the game.
And they really avoided that last year.
Yeah, they were
year prior.
Yeah, they were one of the least injured teams despite investing all of this their resources into old players. And that's the type of injury luck that isn't going to hold. And so at some point, these guys are going to start breaking down a little bit and missing games. I'm not going to say that Aaron Donald's going to regress back to being a human. I think he's always going to be an alien in terms of his abilities, but you know, if he misses a couple games this season, that can be significant for them.
Yeah. Well, he threatened to retire this offseason until they gave him a big pile of money. They gave Cooper Kupp some money as well. Matthew Stafford, they secured all their top end talent for sure. And Allen Robinson coming over. So it'll be interesting this year. I think this is another year where they could be right there in the conversation at the end. We'll just have to see how it plays out.
They should be. I mean, especially with the NFC the way it is. If the Rams aren't in the discussion as one of the teams that could come out of the NFC to the Super Bowl here when the season ends, something went drastically wrong. So, because the top end talent on this roster is there.
All right. So let's move forward to the Miami Dolphins. You said that you were curious as to see how I view this roster. It's interesting. I thought that they were kind of sleepwalking a little bit through free agency, through the offseason, until the big trade happened. Tyreek Hill traded to the Miami Dolphins for picks. And so it left them kind of void in the draft. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But they went ahead and kind of moved forward in kind of a win now sort of team, even though they haven't gotten into the playoffs to show what they can do. But they went ahead and took some moves, maybe to make that extra little move. Now, in a loaded AFC West, Keith, and we've talked about the AFC West overall quite a bit. And, you know, there's 10 teams that are competing for 7 spots, playoff spots. And we didn't mention the Miami Dolphins as being one of those teams. So they really do have a uphill battle to kind of emerge, even in their own division in the AFC East, with the Buffalo Bills and the New England Patriots emerging, and them as well. And so Tua is the quarterback. They've continued to invest. They churned their coaching staff this offseason as well. So you've got new coaches, new offensive scheme coming in. And I'm just not completely sold on this roster. I know that I've been kind of looking at it over and over, but have they done enough? I think they've got better depth now overall, but I think their top end talent is still kind of hit and miss.
Yeah, I mean,
throughout their position groups.
It comes down to, are you sold on Tua? Are you sold on him as a
It's hard to know as a fan when your own coaching staff and stuff wasn't completely sold. And so we'll see what happens with this new regime.
And they did bring in Teddy Bridgewater to be the backup / insurance policy, which I found to be very interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't know. I think, they're retooling a little bit, but they seem like they're retooling every year. Mm-hmm. So it's hard to know until they put the product out on the field and the team rallies around the new coach and Tua takes a step forward, as he should in year 3. Mm-hmm. And they've given him some weapons. They brought in Jalen Waddle and Tyreek
Hill. I mean, that's going to compete for the best, 1-2 punch at wide receiver that you're going to see anywhere in the NFL.
And you add Mike Gesicki to that as a receiving tight end, and Chase Edmonds at running back, and Sony Michel came on. Raheem Mostert is there. Myles Gaskin. So they've got some offense. Mm-hmm. They've got some things that's going to make it likely that they're going to score a lot of points. But what about their defense? Their defense is part of the issue that they've had in the long term here. And have they done enough? And the only real draft pick that they were add to the pile this offseason, just based on the getting rid of their draft picks to get Tyreek Hill, is Channing Tindall at 102 overall out of Georgia, the linebacker. I thought that was a great pick. But that was really the only pick that they had that's going to probably come in and have an effect on their roster this year.
It is. You go through and you look at, they only had 4 picks. They had nothing in rounds 1, 2, 4, or 1, 2, 5, and 6. So they had a third, a fourth, and 2 sevenths. That's it. It's hard to build a roster that way. It really is. And Channing Tindall is a guy that's going to come in and make an impact. But Zuku Anama, the wide receiver, the 4th round pick, is going to have a harder time getting on the field simply because they've already got, the guys in front of him. Mm-hmm. And so I agree. I think you're looking at one guy that's going to make an impact this year.
Interesting. So where do you see them in the AFC or in their own division?
Well, in their own division, I mean, they are not going to be competitive with Buffalo, which is arguably the best team in the NFL. But they don't need to be, because if Buffalo wins the division, they just got to compete with for a wild card spot. And I think they can do that. I think they can get in there. I mean, they do have some nice pieces on defense. I think the offense is going to score. I like their offensive line. But there are some nice pieces here on their defense. I think it's going to be enough to get them some wins. I think they're better than New England, and everyone in the NFL is better than the Jets. So they're going to get some in division wins. They're going to get some out of division wins. I think they can get to 10 or 11 wins, in part because you get to play the Jets twice.
I'm not so sure. I think there's going to be, maybe 3 teams in the AFC, 3 or 4 teams that get to 11 wins. And I don't see Miami being one of those, because you've got Buffalo, you've got New England. I know that you say that New England might be a lesser team than Miami. I'm not so sure. Baltimore is going to have probably a better record. Cincinnati, we know. Cleveland, if Deshaun Watson plays, although a disciplinary meeting coming up tomorrow in the NFL, we'll find out. You've got Indianapolis, Tennessee, Denver, Kansas City, Las Vegas, Los Angeles Chargers. Those are all better teams than the Miami Dolphins, Keith.
Yeah, but it's not. Sometimes it's not always, the better teams that make the playoffs. At who do they play? And so when you have, they play the Vikings, they play the Lions, they play the Texans, they play the Bears, right? They're going to have winnable games. outside of, the Jets and Patriots. Like they've got a path. They don't have to go in and play like they don't have to play Denver and they do play the Chargers, but they, you know what I mean? Like they don't have to go and play those other teams that you just mentioned. So since they're not playing them, they have to be better than the team up again, you know what I mean? Like the team on the field with them. And they're going to have a chance to do that because they don't play the NFC West except for the Chargers.
AFC West.
Sorry, AFC West, yeah.
Yeah, no, if they were in the NFC, we'd be talking about them as being a 4th or 5th seed.
Oh, yeah, easy.
This year.
And if they were in the NFC South, we'd be talking about them as a division winner. Or in the East, for that matter. So.
Maybe. Yeah, maybe. Interesting. Yeah, interesting. Anything else you want to do with this team, or back to the Rams, or we get out here a little early today?
Let's get out of here a little early. We're going to, come back and hit the next pair of rosters here in a few minutes. So let's go ahead and just do it.
Okay. Find Keith on Twitter at Myers NFL. You can find me at Alvstad NFL. Find the show and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform and YouTube, and make sure you share as well. So until next time, take care, guys. Thanks for listening to the Pro Football Playbook podcast. Follow Keith at Myers NFL. Phil is at Alvstad NFL. The show is at PF_Playbook. Listen and subscribe on your favorite podcast app or YouTube, and at our website, profootballplaybook.co.